but you're a strongly Italian American, 100% Italian bloodline, even though you're probably, are you third generation, Daniel?
My parents were born here.
Bloodline wise, you're probably
Oh, yeah.
100% Italian.
Yeah, my grandfather, my mother's side was from Caserta. My grandmother, his wife, was from Vico Equense in Napoli. My father's side of the family, my grandfather was from Basilicata, and my grandmother was Calabria.
So you've got this really 100% Italian bloodline, Italian history from different areas, mostly focused on the southern part of Italy. So you live in Brooklyn, and this is where you've grown up. You've written this book. What's your profession? What do you do in your life? So I know a little bit about you.
Well, initially I started out as a graphic designer, moved into photography, and worked as an animation designer for many years for clients like ESPN, History Channel. In my spare time, in my downtime, I would put together pages of writing and I would narrate it to the photograph that I took. And while I lived in Boston for 6 years, I was a creative director in Boston for about 6 years. And while I was away from home, it was the first time I actually lived away from home on my own. And I began to see a wider landscape of where I came from. So I would obviously go back home for the holidays. And I always knew that we had a very big attachment to our culinary heritage. But I guess in a way I took it as, everyone does this, and it was only until I moved away that I realized what a fascinating process this all was. And I began to document it. Every time I went back, I would shoot images of my mom and her cooking in her kitchen with, limited light, whatever was available. And over the years, I got married and I had a family of my own. And I realized that, the next generation is so reliant on grandparents that, at that point, my father had passed. My aunts and uncles had passed. We had 2 children, Luca and Madeline, twins. And I began to, sort of pick up the mantle where my mom left off. So my mom was one of the only ones who literally wrote down recipes shorthand in a little wooden box called a recipe box, like we all have. And over the years, as a kid, I was always fascinated by this magical box. It only came out around the holidays. My mom would only make these traditional dishes once a year, typically for Festa dei Sette Pesci. And, it would be this parade of phone calls and shopping and comparing notes with her relatives over the phone, because she would inevitably forget. And she would then annotate what she wrote the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. So they became, to me, a work of art. Like they were like Mozart's manuscripts. They're patinaed, they have whiteout, they have ink, they have pen, they have typewriter with, ribbons, where typewriters had ribbons. And I basically, those were my inspiration. So I began to then pick up where mom left off. And I would, do this with my 3-year-old children. I would sit them on the counter. Typically around Easter time, we'd start thinking about making Pane di Pasqua. And I would photograph us in the process. And I began to have this notion that this was all on my shoulders, because I was pretty much the primary candidate to recreate these things, because I had a family of my own. And that's what I did. So during my downtime in between projects for broadcast media, I would put the photographs that I had already compiled with writing. And I finally came up with like a 150-page proposal that was inspired by 2 articles I wrote for an online publication. One was about the Feast of the Seven Fish, and the other one was about Easter. And unbeknownst to me, one of the people who read it wound up being my publisher. His son and my son went to the same PS 107 here in Brooklyn. And my son was a year older than his son. His son and my son played soccer together. And he read the article and he said to me, you might have a book here. So after that, I started working diligently and I pitched it. And he gave me a counter proposal. And I took a summer off and basically documented my neighborhood because he wanted to see more of the neighborhood, possibly recipes. So I created this sort of account of a small area of Brooklyn. It's like a 2-mile radius. And when the book came out, I was actually criticized because it was interpreted that my book wasn't inclusive in the bigger diaspora of Brooklyn. And my point was that I have an intimate relationship with the shop owners in my general area because that's where I went shopping. Shop Local was truly part of my family's religion. Savarese, Bianco's, which is now Panantico. And it took me a while for the shop owners to allow me to photograph them. Because it's clearly one thing when you walk into a shop and you're a customer where they cater to you. It's another thing when you ask them if you can go behind the counter and photograph what they do. So it took me a while to get their approval and their blessing and their trust. So in the book, I wound up canvassing about 15 of my local shops, all of which I knew personally. Well, personally to an extent. And I repitched it to the publisher, and he said to me, he says, the only way I would be able to publish this book is if I feel like I can sell 2,000 copies. Fast forward, it's now in its third printing, and it's remarkable. Like, I don't even know how this even happened, and the only thing I can attribute it to is that it's by divine intervention.
I think what it does, Daniel, and even though I live in Italy, but I have no Italian blood at all, it's just charming, this historical narrative of your micro neighborhood of Brooklyn. And that's so charming. And I love the fact that you have your mom's recipe cards. I talked to my husband. I showed my husband your book, and he's so sad that he doesn't have that from his mom. It's just all kind of oral stuff. So you're super blessed to have that.
Super, yeah.
And the photographs are great. You really capture the essence of these shop owners and their shops and what they do. They're just really great. And the fact that they have that kind of old style look adds to the charm of the whole book.
Thank you for saying that, because I diligently made a point to photograph 95% of the book on film, because I felt like I was born in the late 1950s, in the film era. And I was introduced to this world through film. My father was an amateur filmmaker. He made beautiful 8mm films, some of which I've used in my promotion for my book. And I really felt like the patina and the texture of the film really evoked the scene. I tried to create an atmosphere, and the atmosphere in which this all emanated was from the house my grandfather built as a tailor when he moved here from Naples, Italy, from Caserta. So we still have the same house. We have the blueprints of the house. We even have the pay stubs from his mortgage that he paid. So it's truly like I felt I was writing a story about not only my own personal experience, but I was writing a story for so many of us who have the same shared experience. And I think that might be what people identify with.
Undoubtedly. We met through a mutual dear friend, Michelle DiPietro from Manja with Michelle. And I think that that's what her readers are drawn to. This, oh, wow, you're doing this recipe. I remember that. I remember my mom or my grandma doing it. You have some great recipes. The one thing that distinguishes them, they're much more rooted in the original Italian recipe